Good afternoon, humans. Allison and Toni, your favorite HR partners here with another HR question of the week. This week we got a good one. We get it often.
Building time off policies, PTO, paid time off, or vacation and sick, 2 buckets.
Together or separate?
Which do we do? So the first answer is to divide out which one, right? So PTO stands, as I said, for paid time off, and generally it is an all-inclusive bucket. So it includes vacation time, personal time, sick time, everything in one section for the employee to manage, except holidays.
Don't put holidays in there.
No, don't put holidays in there. Or breaking it out. So keeping it distinctive. Vacation for vacation, going to the beach, hanging out with friends, family stuff, or sick time, right?
I don't feel good.
Actually calling in, you don't feel good, you need to use the time. So breaking it out and the employee having to use it for each individual one versus the employee managing. I use my time exactly however I feel like I need to use it. So what is better? It depends.
Yeah, one of the things that you really want to look at first when determining which type of policy you want to have is your state-specific policies. So at the government federal level, there's not any requirements on either of these, but when you get into individual states, they start having requirements about offering a certain amount of time or offering a certain amount of sick time. And by choosing which way you go, 1 bucket versus 2, sometimes you can save some risk and save some liability upon termination of employees. Great example of this is Massachusetts.
Yep. Massachusetts requires you to have a sick policy. So you have to accrue sick time, you have to allow them to accrue a certain amount for every 31 hour, for every 30 hours worked, the whole thing. A lot of states have state-specific sick leave. And so what happens though for Massachusetts is they say at the end of the employee's employment, they're terminated, voluntary, involuntary, you do not have to pay that out. It's not a liability on the books. However, Massachusetts says if you offer vacation, which you're not required to do, you do have to pay vacation out upon termination. So that is very specific. So if you have a PTO bucket, paid time off, everything together, and normally you would have 10 days vacation and 6 days sick, now you got 16 days, PTO, all of that would be owed at the end of the employment, where if they terminate, you'd only have to pay 10 without the sick days. So.
New Hampshire's a little different. New Hampshire is live free or die, so they have no requirements about offering time off. However, if you do choose to offer time off, the best thing you can do is have a written policy. So in the state of New Hampshire, having a written policy stating what happens upon termination, you can choose as an employer to either pay or not pay. If you don't have a policy, they're going to look back and kind of see how you've done it in the past. So let's say the last 3 people you've terminated, they were great employees, it was more of a retirement or a transition, and you ended up paying out their vacation, and then you get rid of somebody for wrongful reasons or it was just not a good fit, you then would have to pay theirs out if you didn't have a policy. So definitely create the policy, but those are really the reasons you would pick on which of the 2. Some other things you want to think about when creating your policy is how is the time accrued versus front loaded?
Yeah.
So front loaded, for example, would be upon my anniversary, I just get all the time for that year added. Versus accrual, I get a little bit each pay period and I have to kind of build up to getting the full amount for the year. Those are 2 things you want to stipulate, whether you're doing accrual versus the front loaded. Another common one that you should be including is if you're offering a carryover or not. So let's say I don't use all of my time. Does it just go away? Is it use it or lose it? Am I allowed to carry over a certain amount? Does that certain amount I carry over ever expire, or does it just keep going? And things like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of additional things to kind of be taken into consideration besides the accrual and the carryover, deciding 1 bucket or 2 buckets. The other things you want to pay attention to is, are you allowing your employee to borrow time? So if I, start and maybe I don't get my time until 1 year or 90 days, but I'm sick on day 60, do you allow them to borrow against what's coming up in their bank? Or do you allow them to go negative? What does that look like? Do they have to sign something? Do they just allow them to go negative? How negative can I go? Or do you just say, if you don't have the time, it's unpaid time? Can I go unpaid versus using my vacation?
I've got a vacation to Aruba coming up. I got to save my week vacation, but I'm sick, so I would rather this unpaid. Do you allow that, or do you require them to use their time when they need it?
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing to pay attention to as well is making sure you're following a salary exempt person when it comes to the Fair Labor Standards Act, or a hourly non-exempt person. So paying attention to that exemption, non-exemption, because if I'm exempt and you're paying me a salary every week, if I'm sick on Friday or I take a vacation on Friday and I don't have the time, you are required still to pay me my full salary. So making sure you're still paying attention to those salary requirements under the Fair Labor Standards Act is also really, really important to pay attention to at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I think the final thing to also include in your policy is how they're taking it. So do they take it in hour increments, half day increments, whole day increments? What is the requirement? And really a lot of that comes back to how much do you want to administer it, and kind of what's the easiest way for your process depending on what systems you have in place to track the time off and things like that.
And these are policies that BlueLion can absolutely support you in building. It's something that we can help drill out. We can come down. It's very specific to culture. We've worked with some companies who want to allow time to be donated. So if somebody in your organization falls really severely sick and they don't have any more time off, they're allowed to have time donated to them to ease the burden of the finances. There's a buyback, there's a cash out, there's all sorts of things that we think about and we try and work through with you, limiting that liability like we talked about, but also making sure your employees are really feeling valued. So we're absolutely here to help you with something like that. Never really hesitate to reach out if you need some assistance on building those specific policies.
Excellent. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our YouTube.